The psychology of the Kenyan man. Just look at this picture. What could possess someone to do what this Kenyan police officer is doing to this person? Sometimes, you look at some things, and just the evil contained within is beyond shocking. And as you probably know, this is not uncommon. We've seen tremendous acts of hatefulness and destruction that occur in Kenya every single day. Not only from the police, even from ordinary people against each other. And we see this level of violence all the time. And sometimes, you want to take a pause and ask yourself, what could be going on in the minds of the people doing this to someone else? The total lack of empathy and compassion that people appear to have for each other. Now, in the case of Kenya, this goes a little bit more deeper than just societal violence, because while violence is increasing all over the world, there are plenty of societies that are not violent. And even we know from our own history that our populations haven't been very violent for a long time, right? And we know that violence has increased over time. And we even know that in our history, the people groups of Kenya were not particularly violent. Most of the time, all ethnicities minded their own business. Everyone had their own area, and people generally minded their own business. No one tried to, as it were, to colonize any other group. People just lived together separately, they traded, and within those groups, the levels of violence were not high. So this is a fairly new phenomenon that came with colonialism. So I wanted to take a shallow dive into the psychology of Kenyan men. Now, I'm not a psychologist at all, and I'm not claiming to be an expert in psychology, but there's some things that we can observe, and I think we should talk about. Now, in the case of Kenya, and of course Africa in general, but we're interested in Kenya mostly, we know that Kenyan men do not honor other Kenyan men. Kenyan men do not respect other Kenyan men. Kenyan men do not look up to other Kenyan men. In fact, we have a lack of heroes within the culture of Kenya. And if you talk to students or pupils, young students, and ask them, who is your hero? That's very interesting what they're going to respond to you. And many times, their hero will not be a Kenyan man. So this starts from a very young age, whereby we find African men not honoring each other in Kenya at all. And this is the reason why, one of the reasons why, you can see this level of behavior of African man against African man, or Kenyan man against Kenyan man. Now, under colonialism, the whole of Africa was one huge plantation owned by the Europeans, and the different African countries were different farms within that context. And on those farms, the Africans were the slaves, and of course the colonizer was the master. So after a generation, actually, more or less 2 generations, or one, those were 2 generations. So after 2 generations, the slave culture was deeply ingrained in the people. And when the colonizer formally withdrew his troops, well, in the case of Kenya, they did not withdraw their troops, but in many other African countries, when the colonizer withdrew their troops, the colonial structure remained intact. Now, I know you think colonialism is a boring subject and is irrelevant, but it's not really that irrelevant. It's very relevant to what we want to talk about today. So the colonizer withdraws and keeps the entire structure intact. Now, this structure was deliberately designed. When the colonizer came over, the systems that they set up were particularly designed for a particular outcome. Now, what guided the British in Kenya to set up the system that they did, because Kenya was called a settler state, right, was similar to the slave plantations that the British set up in the Americas. It was the same system. Now, the British used various strategies to establish control and, even more important, to keep control over the population. Now, they realized that it is very difficult to keep physical control over such a huge territory and so many people. So you need mental structures to control the people. So if you control the mind, you control the body. And that's exactly what they did. And one of the biggest control systems that the Europeans have over Africa, even until today, is obviously religion. And even without going deep into religion, we don't talk about religion right now. We can just note that in the religion that they started in Africa, they are the gods of that religion. So Africans go into church and they worship Europeans as God, as everything. So that is the biggest control mechanism right now that Europeans have over Africa. But this is not about religion. This we are talking about the psychology of the African man in Kenya, or the psychology of the Kenyan man. The second thing they did was to, how do I say this? To incite inter-ethnic hatred. Like you pick one group to rule over another group. You make all the soldiers and the police from one group, and you use them to oppress the rest, so that the rest start hating this ethnic group who are the police, and they never see the Mzungu behind it. So it's you hating against each other. So we already know that. We know that's the history of, tribalism in Kenya. When you look at the psychological impact of all the control mechanisms that were left in Kenya by the British, we want to look at what was the impact on the psyche and the psychology of the Kenyan man. See, when you're growing up, you expect that your father is all-powerful, all-knowing, your protector, your provider. That is the normal state of life. So you're able to honor your father, you're able to honor your ancestors, you're able to honor your own people. So what is the effect of a child seeing that his father is not in control? For example, you go with your child into a church, right? And your child, very young, they witness you bowing down and worshipping a statue of a European. And to the child, they can clearly see that you do not look like a European. So they can see that you're honoring and worshipping another person who doesn't look like you, who's not any relation to you. So what is the psychological impact on a boy child when they witness their father bowing down and worshipping his colonizer, his enslaver? What is the psychological effect of that? Now, the immediate effect of that is that the child realizes that there is someone more important than his father. And he also realizes that the someone who is more important than his father is someone who's foreign. And many times the child has never met a Mzungu. But he already knows at 2 years old that the Mzungu is God. And he has learned this lesson from his own father. So he immediately learns not to honor his father, because he knows there's someone more important, another man who is even more important than his own father. And in dishonoring his father, he learns to disrespect himself. He learns that he has no strength because his father doesn't have strength. He learns that he is not God, that the Mzungu is God, and he himself is nothing. He is a supplicant to the Mzungu God. So he learns weakness. From that point onwards, his brain is scrambled. He immediately knows when you see the image of the Mzungu, you bow down and worship, because that is God. So, anytime you worship another man as a man, you immediately absorb every effeminate value and behavior, because you don't show aggression to your God, do you? And so when you encounter the Mzungu, your aggression stops because you're dealing with God. And because you're supposed to love God and honor God, and God is a Mzungu, so you love and honor the Mzungu only. So what does it mean in the reverse? It means if you have to love and honor the Mzungu only, it means you have to hate and dishonor the African only also, right? Because you can't have two masters at the same time. You have to have one master that you love and honor, and everything else you hate, because everything else is the opposite of that. So if love and adoration goes to the colonizer, to the Mzungu, then hatred and self-contempt comes to you. And sure enough, you'll see this any single time you sit with Kenyans having a conversation. And even when you listen to the stand-up comedians, have you ever noticed that they have so many jokes disparaging Africans? Have you ever noticed when you listen to them, the stand-up comedians, they have a lot of jokes where they mock Africanness. They mock themselves, not themselves as individuals, they mock us as a group. And in many conversations, you will hear even you talking, mocking yourself. You'll hear people say, this is why I don't like Africans, or this is why I don't like Kenyans. And then they give you an example. You know, in Europe, or it's good like this, like that. You'll always hear the self-disparagement when people have conversations. It's because you cannot have two masters at the same time. So if you're going to love the Mzungu and worship the Mzungu and honor the Mzungu as God, as the divine one, then it means everything that is not honor, love, respect, worship, the opposite of that will be manifested towards yourself, because you are not a Mzungu. And so we find that Kenyan men do not respect African men and do not respect Kenyan men. You will never hear a Kenyan man quoting another Kenyan man. Even when you open up the newspaper, you know, they love to put quotes. Anytime they start an article, they put a quote. But you'll notice they never, ever, 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 ever quote an African. Is it that Africans never said anything? No. So who do they quote? It's always a Mzungu, right? Always, all the time, 24/7. So Kenyan men do not honor Kenyan men at all. Because all honor has to go to who? To the gods that they worship. And the gods just happen to be the Mzungu. So you quote from the God, right? You don't quote from anyone else. So we have that dynamic of Kenyan men not honoring Kenyan men. And what is the implication, the economic implication of that? Even without even going deeply into that, it is very easy to see that if you do not honor yourselves, it means that when you're presented with a choice between what is Kenyan and what is not Kenyan, you will immediately choose what is not Kenyan, because Kenyan equals bad, evil, dishonorable, unacceptable. All the negative values that you can impute to something, you push it on the Kenyan side in particular, and African side in general, right? And everything that is not that becomes good, perfect, holy, acceptable, honorable. And so So what are the economic implications? It's very obvious. Someone places in front of you a choice. This shoe is made in Kenya. This shoe is made in Italy. Oh, I'm buying the Italian shoe. Oh, why? Oh, it's better quality. It's real leather. So in other words, what you're saying is that the cows in Italy produce better skin, I guess, than the cows in Kenya, which is ridiculous. So if you're given a choice, when you're buying coffee and you're told, this coffee brand comes from Kenya, and this coffee brand comes from America. Oh, I want the American one. Well, but the American one, they imported the coffee from Kenya. It's your own coffee. But you'll argue and say the Kenyan one is poor quality and the American one is better. Except the American one is the Kenyan one. You see how ridiculous it gets? Now, if you escalate this across millions of people, all every day making economic choices of how to spend their money, majority of these millions of people will spend their money on anything other than Kenyan. Anything at all other than Kenyan. So what happens to the economy? There are no industry. There are no locally owned brands. There are no. Which Kenyan brand do you know? Can you tell me one? Of anything? Can you tell me a TV brand that is Kenyan owned? A cell phone brand that is Kenyan owned? A motor vehicle brand that is Kenyan owned? Or a motorcycle that is Kenyan owned? Or spoon? You know, utensils. A spoon brand that is Kenyan owned. Have you ever seen a spoon written behind it, made in Kenya, in your life? A spoon. Have you ever seen anything like that? No, you've never, because there are none. Why? Because all the people make all those choices. Even the rich people who have the capacity to start the factories, they will not start factories. Because if it means by starting this factory, it's going to be a Kenyan factory producing Kenyan goods, they do not want, because of that psychology. So this is the psychology that has devastated the economy of Kenya. So what happens when the rich Kenyan has some money and he wants to invest in something? What decisions does he make? He doesn't start his own brand. No, he never starts his own brand, because if it's Kenyan, it's bad, right? So he wants to start a fast food chain. He's rich. He has the capital. So what does he do? He doesn't start a brand for himself. No. He goes to America and get an American brand. So in Kenya, you find there is Kentucky Fried Chicken. There is no Kakamega Fried Chicken. No, because that is not good. Ya mzungu ndio mzuri. So, but there is a Kentucky Fried Chicken. So the Americans keep on making money, even without any effort, because they're enough, you know, how do I put this nicely? There are enough intellectually challenged people, enough intellectually challenged men in Kenya who want to give them money, because ya mzungu ndio mzuri, because that is deity, that is divine. So you'll never find Kakamega Fried Chicken as a brand growing in Kenya and then spreading all over the world. There are no locally owned brands. See, when you hate yourself, you can never originate anything. So you come into the economic landscape of Kenya and you're like, where are the local brands? Where are the local corporations? A local corporation that has grown up in Kenya and spread throughout the world. You won't find any. Why? Because the African man, the Kenyan man in Kenya, only honors what is foreign, because his God is also foreign. So when you look at the way children are brought up, all these activities by Kenyan men of self-hatred and self-rejection They do demoralize the children, because the children grow up not having any example to follow. I remember when we were in primary school, they used to ask us. I remember there was a time we were asked, who is your hero? And I could not find a single Kenyan man that I could call hero. I was a child. I didn't have any powers of analysis. Every single example I had was foreign. Every example was foreign. I could not find a single Kenyan that I could call a hero at that age when I was that young. Because even the cartoons, as you very well know, that are fed into the minds of the children are produced by foreigners, because Kenyan men will not produce anything local at all. And so when young boys see their fathers being so weak economically, weak culturally, weak in every sense of the word, total weakness, 360-degree weakness, what does that do to the boys? It breaks them. They're demoralized. They have no example to follow, none at all. So they start following all these foreign examples because there's no other example being set for them. And this is the tragedy of living in a country where the men behave like women. They are not able to dominate their own country. I'm not talking about dominating any foreign country. I'm talking about dominating your own country. Kenyan men are not able to dominate their own country in any way. I mean, think about it from any time you travel across Kenya, you go into these small towns. Who owns the biggest businesses? The biggest shop? Who owns it? It's never the men of that community. They own nothing. How do you explain this? Total inability to dominate your own village. You can't even dominate your own village. But you have a mzungu name. Hiyo hukusahau kujipatia. Not able to dominate your village, not able to dominate your town, not able to dominate your cities, not able to dominate your countries. Another man dominates everything from top to bottom. So what does that have? How does that affect the mind of the boys? The boys quickly learn the values of being a slave. They learn that in this society, you must take on effeminate behavior, because it's not your society, it's not your economy, and it's not your country. So anytime ukiona mzungu unakunja mkia, you have to, because this is the psychology of Kenyan men. It's the psychology that your father gave to you. And so you never start any business of your own. Even when you become extremely wealthy, you never start a brand. When you start a business, you're not selling things you've made. You are selling things that the foreigner has made. That's what Kenyan men call business. Other people don't call that a business. Other people call manufacturing business. That when they say, I'm going into the textile business, they're not talking about selling someone else's textiles. They're talking about making textiles, creating a brand, and building that brand. When they say I'm going into the shoe business, they're not talking about the cast-offs of other people. No, they're talking about, I'm going to open up a factory making shoes that I'm going to give them a brand, and that brand is going to be my name. And then I'm going to sell those shoes with my name. So when a Kenyan man is saying, I'm going into the cell phone business, he's talking about going into retail business, selling cell phones that have other men's name. The Kenyan man is so embarrassed about his name that he never promotes it. You'll never see a Kenyan putting his name on anything. He's so ashamed of his name that he even has a Mzungu name, just to hide his actual name. Even the few people who try to do things, they never give those brands their own names, their personal name, because they're ashamed of their name. All these people who started these large supermarkets, they never gave them their personal name. If you go to foreign countries, those names of those businesses are someone's personal name. For example, let me give you an example. Equity Bank is a bank in Kenya, right? It is called Equity. Equity is not someone's name, right? Barclays Bank is a bank in Kenya. Barclays is someone's name. Do you see the difference? People who are proud of their names, they promote their names all over. They start brands and they give it their name because they want to see their name shining up. Not the Kenyan man. The Kenyan man is embarrassed about his name. He prefers to have a Mzungu name. So he never promotes himself at all. He does not want to have Kakamega fried chicken. He wants it to say Kentucky, because he's ashamed of the name Kakamega. And sure enough, when you travel outside Kenya and you go around looking for Kenyan restaurants, you will rarely find Kenyan restaurants. Rarely. And when you go there, the names that the few that exist, the names that they've given the foods, they do everything to make sure that the name doesn't sound Kenyan. However, when you look at like the people of Ethiopia, when you go abroad in different countries, Ethiopians love to start businesses, especially the restaurant business. And their restaurants always sell Ethiopian food. They don't care to sell KFC. They want to sell Ethiopian food. And the Ethiopian food has its own name. So you go to anywhere you'll find Ethiopians, you'll find that all the local people who live around there know about their food. They know about injera. All of them. Because the Ethiopians are not particularly embarrassed about their own names. So it's a totally different mindset and a totally different psychology. So you can even just by looking at that simple comparison, you can tell that Ethiopia will industrialize faster than Kenya and will exceed Kenya, especially once their new dam comes online and is generating all that electricity. They have the psychology to win. They have a winning mindset, and so they will win because they love their names and they love everything about themselves, but not the Kenyan man. And so this will impact economic growth in the future, which is why we are discussing this. We are discussing the overall issue is why is Kenya so poor? Why does half the population live inside a slum? So these are some of the reasons why, countries like Kenya never ever develop. It doesn't matter, you give them 1,000 years, they still won't develop because the mindset is wrong. The mind is in the wrong place. And this is something that the men do. You have to talk to the men. You can't be talking to the women before you talk to the men. So if the men are messed up, the country will become messed up. So this self-rejection, this self-hatred is more than an academic exercise. It has real-world economic impact because people are making economic choices every single day, and they're making those choices on the basis of the wrong mindset. It is very difficult when you speak to local producers. Like there's this guy who makes perfumes, and I was really impressed. He actually has a factory somewhere in, I think, Mombasa Road, somewhere. Anyway, he was saying that his greatest challenge is the mindset of the Kenyan consumer, who, upon hearing that perfume is made in Kenya, immediately rejects it. But if you don't tell them that the perfume is made in Kenya, they're willing to give it a try. If you tell them it is imported from Italy or Turkey or somewhere, they immediately want to buy it. And one of his dilemmas was, do I name my perfumes made in Italy in order to sell? So he was saying the obstacle to him expanding his factory and creating even more jobs is the fact that Kenyans deeply despise themselves and anything that they produce. So this slave mentality does have real-world economic impact, and it prevents the economy from growing at all. Even the few people who are trying to develop brands because this guy was trying to develop a brand, and he has many different lines of products. He struggles because of this mindset of Kenyans. And it is Kenyan men who have created and endorsed this self-hatred within the country. And so when you look at this policeman trying to destroy this person, this is a classic case of, and a very unfortunate case of, intense self-hatred and self-rejection. So the policeman is trying to stamp out the person underneath him, because the person underneath him is him. He's trying to kill himself. In stamping or stomping the life out of this victim, that Kenyan man is trying to stomp out the life of himself. It is violence against self. How do we know this? Would he do the same to an Indian? Would he do the same to a Chinese? Would he do the same to a Mzungu? You all know the answer to that. It's no. So the incredible violence that you see, the police have towards the civilian population is a function of this self-hatred. Is when you don't honor yourself, you're always willing to kill yourself. When you see they call it post-election violence, the tremendous anger that African men in Kenya have towards other African men, the animosity, the deep-seated hatred. That is African men trying to exterminate each other. Why? Because all of them worship the Mzungu as God. And like we said, in the slave economy, the slave, because he has to worship the Mzungu as God, so the Mzungu becomes the personification of everything that is good. And so who becomes the personification of everything that is evil? Himself. That's the only reason why we have tremendous inter-ethnic violence, is because all these ethnicities never touch the Mzungu amongst them. Even when the Mzungu insults them, you remember that Mzungu called, his name is difficult, and I will mispronounce it. But do you remember, and don't laugh at me, Cholmondolei or Cholmondalai. You remember he's a Mzungu farmer who killed a Kenyan man. You remember that story, right? And you remember that, first of all, they didn't want to investigate him. How do you investigate God, right? And then people made noise, and then they arrested him, and then there's a lot of shenanigans. The way it goes. Remember that basically nothing happened to him. He wasn't lynched. But how many Africans have been lynched by other Africans? He killed an African man. He wasn't lynched by the villagers. But do you remember the other story whereby and this was really, really tragic. This was horrific. Do you remember the story of the 15-year-old boy who killed a 12-year-old girl? Remember? What did the villagers do? They lynched him. They killed him within minutes and burned his body, right? You remember that? But they did not touch the Mzungu. Right? This is the usual situation with Kenyan men. The psychology of docility and weakness and self-hatred. So you can write all the economic development plans that you want to write. You can go to all the meetings with IMF and whichever Mzungu gives you your instructions. You can do all that. You can do all the papers. You can do all the PhD thesis you want. It's all a waste of time. Until we deal with the issue of the psychology of Kenyan men and we take steps to remedy it, all these other things you do is a waste of time. You can say, oh, let us give out more loans to small businesses. Well, they'll try to produce things and no one will buy those things because they are made in Kenya. So ultimately, we have to address the issue of the mindset of the Kenyan man. So we are calling upon you to address that issue within yourself, because you're a Kenyan man, right? So what is it about you that makes you hate yourself so much? But you say, I don't hate myself, I love myself. But you have a Mzungu name. You love yourself so much that you try to erase your identity and replace it with a proper Mzungu slave identity. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and comment below. Kenya's time has come. Our time has come. Your time has come. A time to succeed and not fail. A time to grow wealth and not poverty. A time to go up and not down. It's time for you to stop walking and drive your car. Stop renting and buy yourself a house. It's your time to get blessed. Join the CCV movement and together let us keep poverty and unemployment out of Kenya. Become a member today. Donate what you can. And remember that the CCV is the only political organization in Kenya that is squarely built upon Christian values, unlike the rest. We'll see you next time. Thank you.